deaths of Fast and Furious star Paul Walker and his friend killed in a fiery car accident over the weekend. Investigators working right now to determine the cause of the wreck.
Paul Walker, one of the stars of the enormously popular Fast and Furious movies, dead in a car crash.
A coffee cup still sat on the workbench, half full, exactly where he set it down on the morning of November 30th, 2013. Around it, more than 30 rare cars waited under a thin film of dust, some of them machines that were never legally allowed on American roads, and taped to dashboards, tucked inside glove compartments, scribbled across torn notebook pages, were handwritten plans nobody outside that room was ever supposed to read. This is what they found inside Paul Walker's garage 12 years after his death. The door rolls open. The building looked like nothing. An industrial warehouse in Valencia, California. No signage, no markings. Anyone driving past would have assumed it stored boxes or machinery, which is exactly what Paul wanted. To the world, he was Brian O'Connor. Sun-bleached hair, fast cars, full control behind the wheel.
Some dudes wear they handsome and they become arrogant with it and they're unapproachable. As a man, he wasn't intimidating because he was so regular and so grounded and so cool.
The man inside this building was something else entirely. Quieter, more obsessed, more serious about machines than anyone outside the door ever. I realized. The team that arrived to open it that day included family representatives, lawyers, and estate appraisers. None of them knew what to expect. Paul had spoken about the place only in passing, a workshop he had called it. Somewhere he kept a few cars. Nobody had pressed him for details. He had wanted privacy, and the people closest to him had respected that. The keys turned in the lock. The metal door rolled up. The overhead lights flickered to life. The team standing at the entrance went silent. Inside sat dozens of cars parked close together. Some wore protective covers. Others were left fully exposed, as if waiting to be driven that afternoon. There was no curated display, no plaques, no sense of an exhibition.
Since we made the announcement during our Las Vegas auction, it's been overwhelming the amount of press that want to come out and see the cars. So we thought we would open it up and let people come out and get a little peek at them ahead of time.
This space was not built for an audience. It was built for work, more than 30 cars. Some had not moved in years, tires slightly deflated, surfaces dulled by time. Others looked touched only days earlier, with tools scattered nearby and parts not yet. Reinstalled. On a workbench, cups still sat in place, as if their owner had only stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. A wrench rested on a fender. A clipboard hung from a pegboard hook, the top sheet still showing a checklist with 3 items left unchecked. Spare tires were stacked in the corner, ordered by size. The air smelled of old oil and cold metal. The team started cataloging. They did not get far before the first oddity stopped them. Then the team noticed something that made no sense. 3 identical 1995 BMW M3 lightweights. 3 of them, side by side.
These BMWs, what make these special is this is the lightweight BMW where there are only a certain amount made, and he had 5 of them.
He did. He loved these cars.
The M3 lightweight is one of the rarest BMWs ever built. The factory produced fewer than 130 of them for the entire United States market. Most collectors spend decades trying to find one. Paul had 3, and each one sat in a different state of completion. Different modifications, different setups, different stages of disassembly. One had its hood propped open with a bare engine block exposed. Another had a roll cage half installed inside the cabin. The third looked nearly factory original, untouched, almost preserved. This was not a collector hoarding trophies. 3 of them only make sense if you are testing something. Beside them stood a heavily modified Toyota Supra, configured far beyond anything that ever rolled off a factory floor.
He really liked the cars, and on those movies he got into it. He could tell you what size turbos the cars had or what they should do different to make them better, and the other actors don't even know how to drive a manual transmission car.
The intercooler alone was the size of a small suitcase. It had never appeared in a film. It had never appeared in a magazine. It existed purely as a working prototype for something only Paul understood. In another row sat several Nissan Skyline GTRs, including an R34, a car that was illegal to import into the United States at the time, requiring federal exemptions that most collectors never managed to secure. Yet there it sat, casually parked beside the others, neither isolated nor treated as something special, just part of the lineup. The team kept walking. Vintage European sports cars, American muscle from the 1960s, lightweight track builds, a handful of vehicles so unusual that even the people cataloging them had to stop and verify what they were looking at. Some had been imported through specialized channels. Others had been built piece by piece from rare components Paul had spent years tracking down. There was a Porsche 911 set up for desert rally use, a Ford Gran Torino with a fresh respray, a first-generation Acura NSX that looked like it had just come back from a track day. The estimated total value climbed past $20 million within the first hour of cataloging, then past 25, then higher. In a back corner of the garage, the team found something else. A row of vehicles covered with custom-fitted dust covers, the kind that take measurements and weeks to produce. When the covers came off, the cars beneath them were not the headline machines. They were unfinished bodies, bare shells, frames mounted on jack stands with components arranged around them on rolling carts. Each shell had a clipboard hanging. Beside it, listing the parts that had already been ordered, the parts still waiting.
But he loved these cars, and as you're seeing car collecting changing, he was really at the forefront of it, and I think Fast and Furious franchise helped really do that.
The steps Paul had been planning to take next. These were not abandoned projects. These were active builds in their earliest stages, paused before they had ever come to life. In another section, mounted on the wall, was a corkboard covered with photographs, track days, test sessions, cars at different stages of construction. A few group shots showed Paul with mechanics and engineers nobody in the family recognized. He had built an entire technical network around this garage. People he worked with on these cars who had no public connection to his Hollywood life at all. The two worlds had been kept completely separate. The actor and the builder, the man on red carpets and the man in oil-stained jeans. Almost nobody had ever crossed from one side to the other. The scale of what he had quietly constructed was only now coming into view. This was not a collection assembled for prestige. It was a workshop, frozen mid-build.
He truly loved the Nissan Skyline and those kind of cars more than muscle cars. He liked the technical part and the better brakes and all the stuff. But then really what he drove in his everyday life was a Tacoma truck. He wanted somebody to ding him, and he'd be like, oh, don't worry about it, and they'd just be shot.
And the deeper they walked into it, the stranger it got. The notes nobody was supposed to read. The cars alone would have been enough of a story. 30 rare machines, $18 million in disputed assets, 3 identical M, 3 lightweights that no rational collector would ever own. That alone would have made the inventory of Paul Walker's garage one of the most unusual estate cases in Hollywood history. But the cars were only the surface. The first note appeared inside a glove compartment, a scrap of paper, folded once, 3 lines of handwriting, quick technical observations about how the car shifted weight under hard acceleration. Then they found another, and another, and another. Inside center consoles, tucked under floor mats, wedged behind sun visors, folded into the back pages of owners' manuals, scribbled on torn notebook pages, old receipts, the backs of repair invoices, even on a paper napkin from a coffee shop in Burbank. Most were brief and direct. Suspension feedback, gear shift timing, notes on which adjustment to try next time the car came out. One note simply read, rear end loose at 95, check sway bar. Another listed 3 possible tire compounds with arrows pointing to the one he wanted to try first. They were never written for anyone else. They were written by a man having a private conversation with his own machines year after year in his own handwriting. He did not simply own these cars, he studied them. He recorded their behavior. He refined them through real, hands-on experience that nobody outside that garage ever witnessed. The notes spanned years. Some were dated, others were not. A few mentioned drivers and tracks the team had to look up to identify. Whoever Paul Walker had been to the public, this was something else entirely. This was a man building a private body of work that nobody had ever seen. And then, inside the glove compartment of the Nissan Skyline GTR,
the V-Spec trim is the ultimate homologation special, tuned by Nissan and used in racing. So you take an already amazing car, hand it to one of the best tuning companies on earth, and then have it make its way to the garage of a true car guy.
They found one note that was different from all the others. It was written in blue ink. The handwriting was clear and calm, but the content had nothing to do with engines, nothing to do with suspension geometry, nothing to do with the car at all. It was for his daughter, Meadow. Nobody in the room read it out loud. Nobody photographed it. Nobody added it to the inventory list. Everyone understood instantly that this was not something meant for them, not in that setting, not by those hands. The note went into a separate envelope, set aside for the family, and that is the last anyone outside the family saw of it. But it changed the entire room. The cars stopped being assets. The notes stopped being technical data. They became traces of a private process, built over years, guided by intention. Paused mid-sentence on a morning in November 2013. The Skyline itself stopped being a car. It became a delivery vehicle for a message Paul had quietly placed inside it, knowing his daughter would one day be old enough to find it. From that point on, the question lingering in the dust of that garage was no longer about ownership or value. It was about what this place had really been for. Before we go inside the cars, he never finished. Hit subscribe. The deeper this story goes, the harder it gets to look away. The projects that stopped at the same moment. Not every car in the garage was complete. As the team moved deeper, they found vehicles partially dismantled, components removed and set aside, builds interrupted halfway through. The atmosphere shifted. This was no longer storage. This was a workspace frozen in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The clearest example was the Datsun 240Z. Its interior was gone. Seats removed, carpeting pulled up. The dashboard itself dismantled and laid out to one side. The pieces were not scattered or abandoned. They were carefully arranged, many of them labeled with handwritten notes on strips of tape, sorted exactly the way someone sorts parts they fully intend to put back. Each label described what came off, where it went, and how it should be reinstalled. The engine bay had been stripped down to bare metal, scrubbed clean of its previous configuration, ready for something new. On the driver's seat sat a small notebook. Open. Face up. The page compared two different engine options, with the differences outlined in brief, precise terms. He had been deciding which one to install. He had not made the decision yet. A pen rested on the page, cap off, as if he had set it down for a phone call he never came back from. Across the floor stood an American muscle car from the 1960s. Taped directly to the dashboard was a list, written in his handwriting. Each item arranged in order of priority. Some were crossed out. Those were the things he had already finished. The rest waited untouched. The next item on the list read simply, Carb Adjustment Saturday. Beneath the steering column, part of the wiring system was mid-repair, some sections already connected, others still exposed. The tools sat right beside them, undisturbed, exactly where Paul had set them down. The arrangement made one thing obvious. Whoever had been working there fully intended to come back, soon, maybe even the next morning. The same pattern repeated through the entire garage. None of these projects had faded slowly. None had been quietly abandoned over years of distraction. They all stopped at the exact same moment. There was no sign of slow decline, no indication of lost interest. Everything came to a halt at once, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a thought, in the middle of a life that was supposed to keep going. A Chevrolet pickup truck sat with its hood propped open and a new fuel pump sitting on the air filter housing, still in the box, still wrapped in plastic. A small European sports car had its rear wheels off and brake calipers laid neatly on a shop towel beside it. A vintage Ford had a fresh coat of primer on one fender and bare metal on the other. Every single project told the same story, started, progressing, cut off. There was something almost unbearable about the precision of it. A man who left his garage at the end of an ordinary workday does not arrange his tools the way Paul had arranged his. He does not label every removed component. He does not leave open notebooks and pens with the caps off and clipboards within arm's reach. Paul had left his workspace exactly the way someone leaves a workspace they expect to walk back into within hours. Not weeks, not months, hours. He never walked back in. The garage waited for him for 12 years, exactly as he left it. This was not a collection of finished assets. It was a system of parallel projects, each one frozen at a different stage. And what remained unfinished revealed more about the man who built this place than anything that had ever been completed. The notebook on the Datsun seat, the crossed-out items on the muscle car list, the wiring suspended beneath, the steering column, the fuel pump still in its box, each one a sentence cut off mid-word. But there was something else in that garage, something that had nothing to do with engines or suspension setups, something that pointed away from the machines themselves and toward the part of Paul Walker's life almost no one in the public ever saw. The cars he was going to give away. On several of the cars, small handwritten labels appeared on dashboards and windshields. Some carried only 3 letters, Row. Others were more explicit, phrases like charity auction, with notes on timing and estimated value scrawled beside them. Row stood for Reach Out Worldwide. It was the disaster relief organization Paul Walker founded in 2010. And it was the part of his life almost nobody in the public knew existed. While the world watched him race cars on screen, he was quietly running an organization that deployed first responders to natural disasters around the planet. He had personally been on the ground in some of the worst disaster zones of the last decade. Most celebrities who get involved with charity write checks. Paul did not write checks. He went to the disaster zones himself. Haiti after the earthquake, the Philippines after the typhoon, Chile, Alabama, anywhere people needed help. He worked alongside volunteer teams doing the most basic, physically demanding labor, transporting supplies, clearing debris, distributing water, pulling people out of collapsed buildings, doing whatever needed to be done. These trips were not promoted. There were no press releases. There were no photo opportunities. The people working beside him in disaster zones often had no idea they were standing next to a famous actor. To them, he was just another pair of hands in a dusty t-shirt. That, by every account, was exactly how he wanted it. One volunteer recalled working a full 12-hour shift beside him in Haiti before someone else mentioned who he was. Paul had not said a word about it. The labels in the garage revealed how far this part of his life extended. Certain cars were never intended to be kept. They were never meant to be developed further. They had been quietly designated for future charity auctions, with the proceeds going directly to Row. The handwritten notes on those vehicles were not technical. They focused on logistics, locations, timing, estimated value, presentation. One car had a note attached, estimating it would bring in enough to fund relief operations for an entire deployment. Another listed 3 potential auction venues with notes on which audience would pay the most. Paul was not just collecting cars. He was using them as a private funding pipeline for the relief work he was doing out of public view. These plans existed before his death. They were already organized. The vehicles had already been chosen. The events had already been imagined. The next steps had already been written down in his own handwriting. And like every other project in that garage, they froze at the exact same moment. No event happened the way he planned. No car entered an auction the way those notes described. The instructions stayed exactly where he left them, untouched, incomplete. The ink still bright on paper that nobody picked up for years. Disasters happened, earthquakes hit, floods rolled through. The funds those cars were supposed to generate never arrived where Paul had quietly intended them to go. The cars in that garage were not just machines he loved. Some of them were lives he was going to save. The volunteers waiting in the field never knew. The communities that would have benefited from the next deployment never knew. The people Paul had quietly built his charity around never had any idea that a private workshop in Valencia, California, had been holding the funding for their next mission inside a row of cars under dust covers. The machines stayed where he left them. The disasters kept happening without them. The war over what remained. The cars never reached the auctions Paul had planned for them. Instead, they entered something else entirely. Not all the vehicles were registered under Paul Walker's name. A significant portion belonged on paper to a company called Always Evolving. The performance workshop and racing team Paul co-founded with his close friend Roger Rodas, who died in the same crash on November 30th, 2013. With both men gone, that structure collapsed overnight. There was no one left to manage daily operations, no one with full authority to make decisions, no clear way to determine which cars were Paul's personal property and which were company assets. Some vehicles his family believed were his turned out not to be registered to him at all. Other cars listed under the company's books had clearly been used as if they were his personal property. The line between the two was blurred in almost every direction. Receipts pointed one way, registration papers pointed another. Verbal arrangements, between Paul and Roger had never been formalized in writing. The two of them had trusted each other completely. Now that trust was the only documentation left. When that line is unclear, disputes begin. People started coming forward with claims. Former associates appeared with verbal agreements that had never been put on paper. Some asserted ownership based on conversations nobody else had witnessed. Others relied on incomplete contracts and informal handshake arrangements that had made sense between friends but became impossible to enforce in their absence. One claim involved a six-figure modification job that had supposedly been traded for partial ownership in a vehicle. Another involved a car that had reportedly been promised as a gift but never legally transferred. Each car became its own case. Each one required its own investigation. Reports placed the total value in dispute at around $18 million. The fight dragged on for years. Lawyers traded paperwork. Appraisers argued over valuations. Family members had to relive the loss every time a new claim surfaced. The garage that had once been a private workshop became a court exhibit. Photographed, measured, inventoried in spreadsheets that turned years of personal craftsmanship into rows of dollar amounts. In 2020, more than 20 cars connected to Paul Walker were finally sold at public auction, generating millions of dollars. Bidders came in from around the world. Some bought specific cars purely because they had once belonged to him. Others bought them for what they actually were: rare, well-built, carefully developed performance machines. Others were retained, kept out of public view, or transferred quietly through private agreements between family members and trusted parties. The legal disputes did not resolve overnight. They continued long after the auction gavels fell, slowly working through ownership questions, valuations, and competing claims. But as the legal processes gradually closed, what remained inside the garage was no longer defined by paperwork or market value at all. The most important cars were never the ones that sold. They were the ones that never got finished. The Datsun 240Z still sat in pieces, still without its new engine. The muscle car still carried its task list in his handwriting. The wiring beneath the steering column remained suspended at the exact point where the work had stopped. Some of these vehicles were eventually completed by other hands. Some were sold to new owners who took them in entirely new directions. And some, according to people involved with the estate, have been preserved exactly as they were, untouched, almost like a museum frozen on the morning of November the 30th, 2013. Their condition does not change their meaning. These were not failed projects. These were projects that were never given the chance to be finished. Looking back across the entire garage, what remains is not really a list of cars or a final valuation. It is the structure of an ongoing process abruptly cut off. The technical notes still rest inside glove compartments. The charity plans still sit on dashboards. The unfinished engines wait quietly under fluorescent light. The coffee cup eventually went cold. The wrench was eventually moved. The clipboard with 3 unchecked items was eventually filed away. But the cars stayed, the notes stayed, and the silence of that workshop stayed with everyone who walked through it. And then there is the one thing nobody talks about: the note in blue ink, inside the glove compartment of the Nissan Skyline GTR, written for his daughter, Meadow. Nobody in the room photographed it. Nobody cataloged it. Nobody read it out loud. It was placed in an envelope, handed to the family, and removed from public view forever. What it said is the one part of this story nobody outside that family will ever know. He left 30 cars behind. He left handwritten technical notes inside a dozen of them. He left a list of charity projects that never reached the people they were meant to help. And he left one note for one person, folded carefully, set inside a glove compartment, waiting for the day she would be old enough to find it. Was it advice? Was it an apology for something only he knew about? Was it just a few words a father wanted his daughter to have, written on an ordinary morning when he had no reason to think it would matter? Nobody outside that family will ever say. Nobody outside that family will ever know. That is what they really discovered inside Paul Walker's garage 12 years later. Not the cars, not the notes about acceleration and gear changes, not the $18 million dispute, not the 3 M3 lightweights or the illegal R34, or the stripped-down Datsun. A father in a quiet workshop, writing something private to his daughter on what turned out to be one of his last ordinary mornings, and folding the paper carefully before he closed the door behind him for the last time. The cars can be sold, the notes can be filed, the disputes can be settled. But that one folded piece of paper, in blue ink, in a glove compartment of a car that should never have been in America in the first place, is the only part of Paul Walker's garage that truly belonged to nobody but the person it was written for. And that is the part of this story that will stay sealed forever. If Paul had one more morning in that garage, which car do you think he would have finished first? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever wondered what other private worlds famous people quietly built behind closed doors, the next video is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it.